hello everybody. I'm super excited to be here this evening with the legend that is Stephen Jones, extraordinary milliner, and the up-and-coming legend that is Matty Bovan, two extraordinary designers. And I just wanted to start really to ask how you met.
Well, through, sadly, somebody who's not here this evening, through Katie Brand. She couldn't make it, she's not feeling very well, but through her, I've worked with her and known her for a very long time. And how did you and Katie meet?
Me and Katie met on a love shoot. I don't know. Just after I finished MA at St Martin's, on a shoot, and when they shoot like portraits, and that's kind of how it started. It was really like just a kind of luck.
Yeah, and she is an incredible matchmaker.
Yeah, she said, I've met this person called Matty Bovan, she said, and I think you'll get on. And I said, why? And she said, well, when you meet him and see all the colours and the ideas, and him, her, you'll understand. She said, he's very much like you, and
right.
It's sort of...
And was it love at first sight?
We were actually on a coach, weren't we, down the road?
Yeah,
from Bistrotek to Oi Polloi at the Christmas tree, which was just under a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We had a really hilarious conversation on the coach.
Slightly fueled by alcohol.
Yeah, Kate was like,
always
let's do
helps.
some
Right.
Let's
So it was literally just over a year ago.
Yeah.
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 And you've given birth to these extraordinary creations. I mean,
It's so fun. I mean, we did the balloon hats in February, which is my first solo show after Showman Fashion East, which got a huge reaction. I mean, people were fascinated by them.
so what I'd like to begin talking about is your mutual time at what was St Martin's when you were there and what is now Central St Martin's. I'm wondering how different your experiences were, separated as they are by 30 or so years. Stephen, you were there at a time when, I don't know, we look back and it seems so incredibly glamorous and romantic, and it was a really extraordinary time. I mean, yes, but I mean, you know, we do look back at those days of St Martin's as being the absolute golden days, which was the late 70s, and you finished in
1979.
1979.
1579.
So, can you remember your first day?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said that you look back, but I mean, then we thought, I mean, it was wonderful, but it was a dump. It really was. I mean, everything was falling apart, and Soho was very different to how it is now. And it's so funny because people say to me, oh, you went to Central St Martin's. I say, no, even before it was twinned with Central, and all those colleges was completely independent. But my first day at college, yes, I was wearing a pair of black trousers and an old black cashmere jumper of my sister's, which had moth holes all over it.
Right, but it was cashmere.
Yeah, and a beret.
Yeah.
But I also had to retouch my arms and things with magic marker, because otherwise you could see the hole, which was not very pleasant when I took it off, because of course then you could see the sort
Right.
That sounds
strange.
quite amazing.
Yeah.
Didn't it move and you saw the skin? Yeah.
I didn't
Quite
move.
a strange time.
I didn't move, I had that much makeup on.
And what did you think? What did you think?
And I was wearing a black beret.
A black beret?
Yeah, and chip black nail varnish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And what were you
course.
thinking when you started? What did you think you were there for? What was...
I was there to be in the centre of London, more than sort of studying. I mean, I wanted to study fashion too, but I was from Liverpool and been to High Wycombe to do foundation. I just wanted to be in the centre of things. And I arrived in 1976, which was the year of punk. So, you know, Soho was, you know, the motherlode. That was where it was all happening. And on my first day at college, I walked into this one particular room, which was everybody was meeting, and there was a whole group of girls on the left, and they were all wearing sort of knitwear and beige and elegantly smoking cigarettes. And then on the right-hand side, there was a group of about 5 punks, and it was literally, do I turn left or do I turn right?
Right.
It was very biblical. And I turned right and sort of slightly never looked back.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was quite a dirty, dangerous place. Soho at the time?
Oh yeah. I mean, everybody, especially when all the girls left college, guys always tried to pick them up in Old Compton Street because that's where all the hookers were.
Yeah, yeah. And it's
I mean, there's nothing to do with the fact that everybody was wearing like red rubber and.
You were taken under the wing of the tailoring teacher, Peter Crown.
Yeah.
And you went to be an apprentice or to work with him, but then you ended up in the millinery.
Yeah. Well,
room.
what happened? I couldn't sew, and I arrived at St Martin's with all these girls who were very, very good at, all these people who were very good at sewing. And he was my tailoring tutor, and he said that after about 6 months, unless I somehow improved it, I was going to fail the first year. So he told me to go and work in the holidays with him, do some work experience. At that time, I didn't know of anybody else who worked in industry in any college at all. I mean, people didn't. And I went to work with him, and I was working in the tailoring workroom and making the tea and picking up the pins and doing all that stuff. And it was very interesting just to see how the world worked. But next to the tailoring workroom was a millinery workroom, and that just seemed much more interesting. And also, mainly women in there had a really good point of view of life, and they worked very hard and they played hard. And somehow, I just thought I wanted to be with them. I didn't want to be with the grumpy old tailors.
Right, right.
Sorry,
right.
John Skelton. Whose gorgeous coat I must have removed now.
So you were attracted by, it sounds like it was quite real, what was going on in there.
Yeah,
it was hard graft.
Yeah. But, I mean, it was great.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, it was great. But, really what I learned at college was sort of going out and meeting people and not really about fashion design.
Yeah, which is how it should be, really.
Yeah.
Matty, were you intimidated on your first day at Central St Martin's?
Yeah, because I studied my foundation in Leeds for a year, and there was a lot of horror stories going around about St Martin's at the time. But I had my heart set on going there, which
horror stories, as in just
people cutting up work, burning work, etc., etc.
Right.
Which for my
Is it true?
No, it's not true. I know that's why. Well, not as far as I see.
Right.
No, I mean it was completely different. That's why I think I went kind of not expecting. Like I thought it was going to be quite competitive and quite intense, which I guess it was in a tiny way. But no, so I guess I was kind of like, what's it going to be like? But it was. I think because I had those expectations, it was amazing. I didn't go thinking it was going to be like, I wouldn't make all my friends there, but actually you do. Yeah.
And I think probably when Stephen was there, it was probably, you weren't working all the time. But it seems to me as though students now work awfully, awfully hard. And, and obviously it's extremely difficult financially with the fees. How did you manage?
Well, I was lucky when I was there because it was the cheaper fees, but to be honest, it's like never money anyway. You don't touch the money, like I still owe it all anyway. But I don't know, I kind of went in on like a budget and it was kind of doable. I mean, I was saying to my friends earlier, I didn't even eat out when I moved to London, I didn't do anything, really, because you kind of make do what you got, which is nice. I was so happy to be here and to be with like-minded people, which sounds kind of cheesy, but it was true, I didn't expect to find such sort of interesting, good people who I got on with immediately.
Yeah. And did anybody particularly take you under their wing?
What
in terms of, I suppose, tutors, or did you, was there a kind of...
Well, yes, so I'd come to the open day when I was in Leeds, and I met Sarah, who's here tonight, and she was, because I knew I wanted to do knitwear very specifically, which is quite focused, I guess, looking back. And I met Sarah and kind of clicked straight away, and I felt like, this seems to be, this is where I want to come. And I was obviously lucky enough to get in, because it's quite hard. It's a hard place to get into, so it feels kind of a million miles away anyway.
Yeah.
But once you're in, it was so much fun. It was I was very, very grateful to be there.
Right.
And just enjoyed it. It was really enjoyable.
Did you work very hard?
Yeah, but when you enjoy it, it doesn't feel like work. Again, it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's true.
Yeah.
And we were lucky enough to be in the old building as well for 2 years, so it was nice to Charing Cross and to be in the new one. So it was good to kind of see that.
You touched on the idea on having a very social time, Stephen, when you were there. But your kind of social circle really turned into your clients. And how did that happen?
Well, when I started to go to clubs, and there was one particular club, the Blitz Club, that I was going to, which was run by Steve Strange and Julia, who's here somewhere. There she is over there. And I was going every week, and we dressed up, and Steve Strange was my first ever client, real client, apart from my mum. Of course, she was the first one. But Steve was the first proper paying client, and he was they were just moving from one shop, PX, in James Street in Covent Garden, to another shop in Endell Street, and he knew that the basement was going to be free, and he asked the owners if he asked the owners if the basement was going to be free, and they said yes. So in a year of leaving college, I had my own little shop,
Right.
which was amazing and not planned. But I had a shop, but I didn't have a workroom. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have any of that.
Right.
I just sort of did it.
Yeah.
And we had a fantastic opening party. He invited about, it was Dougie Fields who did the invitation list, and he invited like 250 people or something. I mean, the shop was about the size of this podium.
Okay. Yeah.
But thank God it was a nice day and everybody was out in the street.
Yeah.
And my parents had bought one case of white wine, so everybody went down to the pub and it was fine.
So you've always really had private clients.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, perhaps one of your most extraordinary clients was Anna Piaggi.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit how you worked together and how you kind of informed each other and, I suppose, learned from each other?
Well, the funniest thing is the first time she came to my shop, I actually wasn't there. And somebody phoned, Kim Bowen phoned me up and she said, "It's Anna Piaggi's in the shop." And she was absolute queen of fashion then. And that was in 1980.
Right.
And she'd come to London to do a shoot for Vanity magazine with Manolo Blahnik. And in the end, it turned out being hats and shoes together. But she was a real muse to me, and we had this sort of crazy relationship. When she had the exhibition at the V&A, we were both interviewed separately. It was a bit like Mr. and Mrs. or something, in separate rooms and the same questions. And I said, I love Anna dearly, we're really good friends, but frankly, if I didn't make hats, I don't think she'd be so interested. And she said, well, Stephen's a really charming person, but if he didn't make hats, I wouldn't be so interested. So, I mean, what we did have is fantastic honesty between us. And in those days, I'd be on the phone and I'd send her a sketch, and it would be by fax, and I'd send her one sketch. She said, "Yes, but Stephen, but where's the veil?" And I'd do another sketch, all in real time, and where's the veil, and do that and change that. So, I mean, it was a bit like FaceTime, but the old-fashioned version.
Right. Slightly slower.
Yeah, slightly slower. But because it was just in black and white and a line drawing, in fact, much easier.
Right, yeah. And Matty, for you, obviously, I think private clients must be a really, a natural path for you.
Yeah.
And you recently made a Swarovski-encrusted gown for Rita Ora.
Oh yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
A knitted gown.
You knitted the gown.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy having a creative conversation with a client, actually creating something with somebody?
Yeah, totally. I think because they always kind of take it somewhere else. I mean, it's very different when it's for one person personally, because they have kind of specific things they don't like and do like. But I think actually you do learn a lot more in a way, because you have to kind of tailor things physically and mentally to someone.
Right.
But it's really fun because it kind of, you always get something I don't think you'd expect.
Yeah.
And it is more collaboration when it's that intense relationship.
And
Yeah.
it really is a collaboration as well, because it's not necessarily something that you would have thought of yourself.
Exactly.
And then ultimately, you think, is the hat or the outfit wrong, or are they wrong?
Yeah.
And you have to balance it between the two things.
Yeah, but it's like they take things they like from your work, but obviously people do have kind of strict ideas of what they will and won't wear. So it's always interesting, I think.
Yeah.
But it's always fun, it's like a challenge.
Yeah,
And sometimes they really don't know
Yeah,
as
true.
well.
Or can't
And
make
you
a
have to
decision.
guide them.
Yeah.
And it's a big, scary world, the world of fashion, so you have to guide them into the right.
Yes,
Yeah.
because not everyone's
Yeah.
100% confident as obviously, maybe I would be wearing something because you know how it goes. Like,
Yeah.
So it's kind of.
But
learning
there must be something about the experience of actually having something made especially for you, that that you just can't get from going to the shop and buying something off the peg.
Yeah, totally, and that's why I think it's kind of way more personal. It's like a really mini intense relationship,
Yeah.
Obviously, you want someone to be happy with it, so it's not. I think it's really nice.
Yeah.
And I think actually a lot more people are interested in that socially, and with clothes and everything, the dialogue happening, and also big stuff being very limited, or stuff I do tend to do stuff that's a little bit different. People really like that.
Yeah.
Each piece can be a series, but it's all slightly different, which I think would be exciting as a consumer.
Yeah. I mean, it seems as though you are the absolute antithesis of fast fashion. Everything you do has just so much work in it, and it is all done really by hand.
Yeah. I mean, all the textiles, I work on really closely. A lot of stuff by me, because that's one of the most exciting bits, and you can't you can't outsource a lot of things because it's I like to do stuff in the moment.
Yeah, you've talked about how you feel as though the way that we are consuming clothes has slightly spiraled out of control. As a fashion designer, do you worry about how you can control your output?
I never went into this saying I'm going to make 1,000 of one dress. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But it's right for some people. It's just not right for me. Of course, I think it is worrying how people consume stuff, but at the same time, fast fashion is cheap, and people, a lot of people don't have the money to spend. I understand there's a lot of different reasons. It's just not black and white. But of course, there's a lot of everything being made. I mean, we're literally drowning
Yeah.
under a sea
Yeah.
of everything being made. It's like too much stuff.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to say that. It's very difficult to actually do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking for, the past 2 decades about trying to make this industry a bit more sustainable, slowing it down a bit. But it seems as though you're part of a generation of designers for whom it's second nature. It's not an issue anymore. Why would you be wasteful?
Yeah, well, I was saying this earlier to a friend of mine. I was saying the thing is, a lot of people don't realise that a lot of the stuff we do is with kind of end of mill like yarns, end of mill fabrics. Obviously we do have certain things we can reorder because you have to kind of be able to remake certain things. But it's always been a natural way. When I started off, a lot of the stuff was you just couldn't get a lot of fabrics again.
Right.
I'm kind of trying to balance it more as I go on because I understand people do want certain colours again and stuff. So it's always interesting, but it's exciting for me because there's some things you source that you just can't get. And I would imagine it's the same with Stephen because a lot of Stephen's hats are, they're all pretty much one-off. So there'll be certain fabrics you find that you love, or certain textiles you put in them that you can't get again.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which is the fun bit.
I mean, certainly when I started off, I think probably my main fabric supplier was Oxfam. And what I used to do is go and buy old felt hats and reblock them. I used to go and get, in those days you could get like 30s and 40s evening dresses, which I would then cut up and make, because it was cheap. I mean, was it sustainability an issue? Slightly, not hugely, but it was just something that I did. But now sustainability is an issue, absolutely. And we're very conscious about what happens to fabrics that we don't use, and we don't burn more like Burberry. Also, well, they're not doing that anymore.
When things are cheaper, though, you're way more uninhibited. That's also an important part of being a designer. I think if you can have the most expensive fabric in the world in front of you, but it's difficult to get going. You
can have the most expensive fabric in front of you, and it looks really cheap. And you can have the cheapest fabric in front of you, and it looks really expensive.
Yeah, exactly. It's never as simple as being like, well, here's £1,000, go and buy this silk and make a nice dress, because that's not the excitement.
£1,000 a metre.
Yeah, literally. You never know where it's going to come from, and sometimes you find something really cheap and you just fall in love with it.
Yeah.
It's the way it is.
Yeah.
And is that part of the challenge for you? Does that make you, your creative juices flow even more if you do have a bit of a challenge?
I always like a challenge, yeah. I always say, when I first started, a lot of my fabrics were really, really cheap, and that was the fun part, like trying to make them desirable. But obviously, the more I go on, I am kind of experimenting with other fabrics, because you always, each season, you want to kind of, you get a bit itchy, and you want to, have a go with this, maybe try silk velvet, opposed to polyester.
Yeah. I mean, that was what happened, funnily enough, with this hat here. We thought, let's do a hat based on housework.
Yeah.
So that's why we got the plunger and everything. But in fact, to have the wire going up in that particular way, I had that frame not made in my workroom, but by the man who makes all the crowns in the opera in Paris, because he can work with that particular wire, which has a particular spring to it. So, what appears cheap and
Yeah, oh, of
Yeah.
course,
is
yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way
yeah.
people always see things is always completely different, isn't
Yeah.
it? Sometimes people will say, oh, that looks so expensive, and it's not, but then the expensive stuff looks cheap. It's quite hilarious, really. I mean, it's always the way it is.
Yeah.
Even with a lot of the knit I do, a lot of people think...
You're going too much away.
No, not anymore, it's all changed, obviously. A lot of the knits that I do, people think are prints, so sometimes you realise people just see things a completely different way.
Yeah.
And when you're so involved in the process, you sometimes get...
You see this hat up there?
Oh,
This
yeah.
was a hat that I did for Giles, but those it's actually just paper.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ah.
So it was just photographs of spanners. Everybody thought they were real
Oh,
spanners
wow.
that we sort of cast in resin or something, but it was just photocopies stuck on that
Amazing.
board.
Top tip number 1.
Yeah.
So, because I guess everyone takes pictures, like it was just photos that circulated, everyone thought they would have been real.
Oh yeah,
It's quite
yeah,
genius.
yeah.
Very clever. Matty, where do you see your brand going? The Coach collaboration takes you to a different audience.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So I met Stuart Vevers through Katie Brand, of course, because they're good friends. And I actually, from the first season I did with Fashionista, I started using Coach bags and customising them in the show. And I guess it wasn't, not many people were as aware of it. And I just kind of got existing bags and was allowed to do whatever to them, which was great. And obviously that kind of naturally developed into something a little bit bigger. And we still did like a limited range that we did with matches around now, which were so much fun to do because it's such a big company. And we wanted it very limited and exclusive. It was really fun. It's interesting because they've got such a big reach. It's obviously very different, but I think that's why it kind of works.
Yeah.
Because
But it's interesting what they're doing because I think for a designer like you, I think the buyers have to change the way they're buying.
Yeah.
You're not fitting into the mould of how things have been
I
done.
think a lot of designers kind of coming up with my peers, is that the word? Have got similar opinions. I think because the generation of designers before us, a lot of people, it was very difficult, and had a lot of pressure from stockists and from money, So we kind of, obviously when you intern, you pick up on these things and you become friends with these people. So it was kind of like we were almost trying to not go down that same path. And also, like, everything's changed very much financially and in the economy. So it's just a reaction. So I think it's about keeping kind of a handle on it.
Yeah.
And I never wanted to pump thousands of dresses out in the world.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
there's other ways you can kind of reach people.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And for Stephen, you've obviously been part of so many incredible collaborations over the years. From Fiorucci to Dior to John Alexander Skelton. How do you adapt what you're doing to another person's creative vision?
Well, everybody that you just mentioned, it's always a collaboration. It's not something that I would think, it's just like working with a private client, as we were talking before. It's not something I would think of myself, and not something they would think of themselves. The ideal way really is to build it together. It doesn't always work together and really work perfectly like that, but somehow you're trying to construct something together. But it is, if I go into a meeting with Comme des Garçons, go into a meeting with Maria Grazia, they're very different conversations. But it's almost like going into a cocktail party or something, and every person that you meet, you'd have a slightly different conversation with them because they're of a different character. The way that people behave is they try and sort of reflect each other and find a mutual communication. And hats are very much about communication. And it's very interesting also to talk to those people and find out what makes them tick. And it's sort of extraordinary, with Tom Brown, who was interviewed here a few months ago. Work with him and find out how does he go from World of Menswear to doing the crazier shows, and especially the show that he just showed, which he got a real large amount of flack for. Working with John Galliano for many, many years, seeing what sort of makes his creative juices work. Each one's very individual, and each one's a different dialogue. I mean, sometimes it does get mixed up. I have to say, in
That's
sort of the week
interesting.
before the shows, and I tried to think, who was that for? And oh dear, I put Comme des Garçons bow on a Dior hat. But I think I know that, because I know the handwriting that I'm trying to sort of portray within the hat. But that's sort of what makes it fun as well.
Yeah.
If I was just working with one person, that's why, I mean, I sort of know what I like. I'm always interested in what other people like and trying to find the combination between the two.
Yeah. Do they ever kind of cross-fertilise in your workshop? You know,
I don't know. You'd need to ask Julie, the head of my workroom. Sometimes, yes. But, you know, if we're working with a particular client, everybody has to get in the headspace of that particular thing. I mean, at the moment, we're working, I mean, I have a meeting tomorrow for Dior Man with Kim Jones in Paris. So, and the workroom's been working on things, and it's sort of like every living moment you spend in the brain of Kim Jones. He's not there, but you sort of channeled him totally, and what he does, and if he was doing this stitch, how would he want to do that? So I'm thinking as well, how do I bring, you know, quite a few years' experience at Dior to what he does? How feminine does he want it to be? How masculine does he want it to be? So it's a very intense thing and all-encompassing.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah.
You can't do it sort of like in a light-hearted way.
Who is your support team? How does it work?
How does it work? Well, I work with a great team of people, from people like Annika here, who's my PR, to Craig, my husband, who's head of one of the workrooms and worked on all the cut and sew hats, very much so. And then I have Julia, who's the head of my model millinery workroom. And then there's another workroom as well, which is a trimming workroom in Veronique. So we have a very close, tight-knit group of people who I've been working with for a very long time. And each of them have a definite area of expertise. So yes, sometimes I will be making a hat myself, or I'll go into the workroom and I'll do something, but more often than not, the head of the workroom will say, no, that's wrong, can you redo it? So, no, it's funny because I've always worked internationally. So many milliners work through 3D and they work on a poupée little head and they sort of do a sculpture. I've always worked by pencil and by drawing because I have to be able to send my picture to Anna Piaggi, to Rei Kawakubo. I've always worked around the world. And also, you know, it's so fast just to do a line on paper and say, well, this is the idea of it. Some people can't read drawings. Some designers can't read and need to see something in 3D. But for me, to get that basic idea across, that's why I work in sketch. And I draw every day. And in the way that your tutors say to you, make sure you keep a notepad every day. Keep a notepad with you and do drawing every day. And when you're at college, you think, how ridiculous. So they are totally right.
So you've got a whole archive of these.
Yeah.
How exciting.
And I never really look at them again.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And you take on
Don't look
apprentices. Do you take apprentices?
Yeah, even though it's really complicated now. I used to, I always paid interns, but actually we had so many people coming from abroad to England because millinery is such a rarefied and specific and idiosyncratic thing. We had milliners from all over the world coming to me to learn their trade and also to share what they knew. So I had extraordinary Japanese milliners whose sort of tenacity and perfection was extraordinary. I had German milliners who brought a real craft tradition with them. They all brought something and they learned something from me. But sadly, that doesn't really happen now.
Right.
And it's going to happen even less.
Yeah, no, it's a shame. Matty, can you tell us about your support network and your team?
So I have one person I work with pretty much full-time, which is Greg, who's here tonight. He's like my right hand on everything we kind of do. And then we work with, I sometimes have a few interns, but it's quite small and intimate.
Right.
And obviously we're up north, so it's kind of tricky.
Yeah.
You still get, it depends on the season.
Right.
And I'm sort of starting to outsource people to help with crochet up north, and starting to maybe work with like seamstresses in a factory up north, which is good. Started working with the knitting factory, so it's trying to find people UK based, which actually it's taken a while, but it's really interesting because there is still a lot of skills you can find.
Yeah.
But you knit yourself.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But
Do you knit on the train?
I actually did today. It's in my bag.
So do you think having...
If you want to I make hats on trains too.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Well, it's so soothing. Also, when you spend half your life on a train, it's kind of useful.
Yeah.
I remember so many years ago when John Galliano first went to Givenchy, and I think it was the first season. Anyway, the hats all went finished, of course, and we were making some in London because the workroom in France couldn't finish more. And I was saying this hat, which was like a strawberry cane, on the Eurostar, on the play. No, it was on the Eurostar, and it was unfortunately during the same time as England v France rugby, and I went over and it was a carriage full of rugby players, and one rugby player like grabbed this hat out of my hand and put it on his head and said, "Look, I'm Naomi Campbell," and I said, "Actually, it's for her." So,
that's fantastic. Yeah, great.
All the supporters
You got it back.
Right.
helped me with my bags and suitcases and hats
great.
and everything. They were great, got me into a taxi the whole way.
Oh, great.
So you spend a lot of time on trains, Matty?
Yeah, I was on 11 trains last week.
And
11?
And you're going back tonight.
And you're going back tonight.
Yeah.
And do you find actually being out of London helps you creatively?
Yeah, I love it. It's also kind of, when I'm back up there, I'm in work mode. When I come up here, it's kind of more for other bits of work, but I don't have a studio here, so it's not like that hands-on.
Right.
But it doesn't feel unusual. It always felt very natural. That's why it kind of started. It wasn't even a conscious thing. It was just a money-saving thing. And then I just didn't leave because I've got more space and less pressure with money and everything.
Yeah.
So.
But it sounds like, if you've got a factory that you can work with and you've got, you can outsource your crochet, it sounds like you're absolutely in the right place.
Yeah, it's just taken a while. I mean, I've been doing this only for 2 years, my label, but it's kind of putting everyone in, like trying to work out who you can use and how things work. And because obviously at first I wanted to do the first 3 seasons, did everything, just 2 or 3 of us, and you've got to kind of learn a little bit to delegate.
Yeah.
It's exciting because then you can get, it's like talking about collaboration thing again. It brings other things to the tables that maybe I wouldn't do or couldn't do.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about the crafts that you use? What sort of techniques? Because there seem to be many in any given outfit.
So I do machine knitting on 80s domestic knitting machines, hand knit, crochet. We do some weaving. Some's done in London. Trying to do some in-house. We've got a loom.
Right.
It's quite fun. What else? Embroidery. We do a lot of screen printing. We do in-house as well, which is nice because they're all a bit off. Because it's hard to get the factory to do that,
Right.
It's just kind of a different way. I like it to all be a bit different and be a bit kind of wonky and be a bit more messy. Basically, anything I can kind of do with textiles, I will do at home.
Right.
It
So
basically can be anything.
it sounds like a kind of laboratory.
It's fun, but I mean, I've always been like that since I was a kid, really.
Right.
It's just kind of got more things to play with. Also, you get more, I think, a bit more frustrated each season because you're trying to find something new to play with. So it's like finding different weirder materials or different processes.
Yeah.
Obviously the combinations are endless, but it's great fun. Obviously, it's an important part of my work.
Yeah.
Do you think you've given too much then to your public already?
No. I've been very guarded. I'm actually doing no textiles next season.
Fantastic.
But there is a real playfulness, I think, to what you do.
I enjoy it so much, and that comes across.
That's what I love too.
Yeah.
And that's why we work very well
Yeah,
together.
but it feels natural, It's like when me and Stephen and Katie had the last meeting for these hats, it was just so much fun, wasn't it? It was literally just like, we were kind of like, we were like kind of these different characters, and we were like, well, let's...
Very organised,
Oh,
professional.
Okay. Yeah, well, of course.
But it was just great fun, and it always is, It was just, and it was easy. It was kind of like, and then Stephen, you did some sketches live. Which, I mean, I understand them. I can read them. I was like, okay, great. Then you sent them through colour the same day on email. Great. And then I printed them out, had them all. You can kind of. And I was thinking about them with the clothes, but you've always got to have a bit of room for movement. But it just was so easy. It just felt really natural.
So at what point in the collection do you start to think about hats? Is it at the beginning?
This was quite early. I remember I'd done worked at the factory on the knits, had some of those. I had some samples and some fabrics, so I kind of knew. But it was quite early on, I think, because I didn't have any full
You didn't
looks.
really have any silhouettes.
No.
we didn't have that idea that you would have like almost like a 50s ball gown.
Yeah, exactly.
Strapless 50s ball
Yeah,
gown.
we had textiles, a bit of textiles, we had some colours, and then the conversation, and it was
it's
great.
A conversation.
Right.
But it was
this is the result of the conversation.
It's so much fun because obviously, like, it just adds such a different, like, it really layers everything up with the hats. It was amazing, like, finishes them off.
Yeah.
And it kind of takes the looks to the next level, which is it's so much fun. And also, you know, I wouldn't have thought of doing a miniature Busby, you know, with a duster. But then when we talked, it just came.
It just came out the conversation.
You know, it just
No,
happened.
because we were talking and I was thinking about how could we do this, and you know, I always knew that a plume on the side of a Busby always looks like a duster to me. The two things are the same shape.
And it does.
So I said, well, why not?
Exactly.
And so we built this around it.
Yeah.
It was it just was really fun, you know, and kind of natural.
Yeah.
We wanted to have a balloon hat here, but they were actually too big.
So tell us about the balloon hats. Were they tricky to do technically, or was it tricky just to control them?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, the simplest things, and it was actually very, very complicated because we tried like wrapping up balloons like this and having the action of a flat thing and then wrapping them around, but it actually didn't work because all the balloons had to be set in a very organised way for them to make a nice shape. So we had to make a sort of a package and sort of string it up with tapes so it's the right silhouette, and then feed in balloons from underneath, and then sew all that onto the balaclavas when it was. So in fact, we had those all in Covent Garden, and we had to cover them all in bin liners to carry them down the street, and you know, they were huge.
They were massive. That was the thing. I mean, the models, it's amazing. It's like an illustration because they're so tiny underneath it.
Yeah.
But yeah, people were fascinated by them.
Yeah.
And Stephen made like a few incarnations before they became the balloons, and that was really interesting because it was we were like, oh no, the balloons are really successful. And you said to me, although it seems like it has been done, it actually hasn't.
No.
You said you think John had some balloons on the catwalk. I think someone was holding maybe
On a string, yeah.
And so the simplicity was great, and people loved them.
Because that's a classic. I mean, they look so effortless, but
But the models loved it because they were obviously they didn't feel like they had anything.
No,
I mean, obviously a bit near the lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
They were helium, not hydrogen.
how do you feel when that, you know, that must be extraordinary when it all just comes together before they go out on the catwalk?
Yeah.
Is that?
It was so exciting, wasn't it?
It was.
It was the first time we worked together.
Right.
It was the first time you'd done like a big show there in Somerset House.
And it doesn't really hit you. Well, it doesn't even really hit me till after the show when you start to like look back and try and. I also had norovirus at the time, so it was not really not very. But I was there.
But I remember you putting me into the clothes and I was putting the hats on, and it was like, oh my God, look what the girls look like.
They looked,
and they had genius makeup on too.
They looked great. Yeah. It was just so exciting, you know. And
but it wasn't as though we'd had a final fitting the night before and we'd seen exactly what they were all going to look like.
Yeah, because we tried some at the studio. I think we tried one on at the studio with a look, and that was. But you know, I knew it would work. I had a complete faith. So, you know, because you can't be that control freaky. You know.
But it's interesting, you know, going back to your norovirus. Sorry, but it is a very tough business. This, isn't it? Because you know, you can't just say, oh, I can't do this now. I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Does that kind of scare you sometimes?
No. I think you know what you're getting yourself into.
Right.
And also, I'm very lucky I work with incredibly nice, amazing people. You know, it's not like, there's never any big drama, touch wood.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
He's so young.
Well, I'm waiting for that. There's something will happen. Yeah. But I'm very, you have to be quite fluid because things do change last minute. Things do go wrong. Things don't always fit, you know.
Yeah.
But I'm very lucky to work with really great people. So and no one's really, you know, diva or dramatic or anything.
Right.
Everyone's very, very nice and very, very calm.
Yeah.
Which is good. Always
Even
helps.
though, you know, what we're seeing on the catwalk is very, you know, kind of diva and very, you know, super fabulous. And you imagine that behind the scenes, you know, there's all sorts of histrionics going on.
Not as far as I'm aware.
Right.
There's a lot of people back there, maybe that know. But it's always, I think, as long as you're organised.
Yeah. And the collection just gone at the end. It was a real. I think a lot of people felt quite emotional at that collection, and there was something, you know, quite, fabulous about Vivian being there in the audience.
That was great, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know she was going to be there until I think 15, maybe half an hour before.
Right. But it seems to me that you share a certain, rebellious spirit. And I think she sort of ordained you as a punk, which must have been, a kind of...
Well, she was one of my biggest inspirations growing up, because I think she was just always, everything she kind of did was her, had like a stamp on it. And it was always quite, you can just tell that she loves kind of textile and the cut, and everything was always really interesting. And even going in the shops as like a teenager, looking at the clothes sneakily, it was amazing. I'm a huge fan of Vivian and Andreas, so it was amazing they came, but I didn't know. It was quite,
right.
It's quite a shock.
Yeah, but that collection as well, you talked afterwards about, this being such a period of political unrest and kind of, people feel quite uneasy, but you felt as though you just wanted to do something quite joyful. And
well, I don't think I'm very useful politically or socially, so I thought I wanted to do what I think the best thing I'm doing to do is for me is to be creative and channel that and try and inspire people and the younger generation and the older generation and try and that's what I'm good at. So I thought I might as well go for it. And I wanted to make people feel. Before the show, I said I wanted to make people feel almost like uneasy with the amount of craft in it, because it was incredibly. It was like Buckaroo of craft. There's literally every technique I think I've ever done in that collection. Yeah. I thought let's just go for it.
And Stephen, you've always really banged your own drum. It's always been. Do you think that's what's kept you going?
I don't know. It's just because I love doing it, and it is crazy and difficult. It's a very difficult business to be in, and World of Hats is quite complicated because, we don't have a million suppliers. Not everybody. How many people are wearing hats in the audience tonight? Not many. So if you think, well, these are possible clients, but nobody's wearing a hat, but everybody's wearing clothing, and that just gives you an indication of how tricky it is to be a milliner.
Yeah.
Thank you, audience, for volunteering for my point.
Yes. Well, I think this is a really good point, actually, to stop up and see. I'm sure the audience do have some questions for you. Yes.
Oh.
What were some of the names of the hats are here? They have quite funny names.
Oh, yes, I name every hat, almost. These were actually ones for Schiaparelli, so these didn't have names. But yes, when I make a hat for my own collection, certainly, you're making this own little world, its own little character, which then gets put on somebody's head and it becomes their character. But yes, actually none of these do have names.
Oh, really?
Yeah, actually none, because they're all for other, this is for Matty now.
Does the name come after or before? Do you...
I think we gave them names in the meeting, but it was more like we were kind of joking about the characters, weren't we?
Yeah.
We had the Busby, we had the cleaner, we had the bank, or City Boy, I call City Boy the little hat with the money.
Yeah.
So that was we were putting the hat on Katie's dog in the meeting. The tiny hat, that was quite fun. It liked the hat, I didn't not like it.
Yeah, so you theme it with the visuals and with the name as well. But yeah, I mean, I've called a hat electric chair. I've called a hat, in fact, this winter's collection was all about the summer's collection was all about perfume, so it's all Miss Dior and Le Bleu and things like that. So
great. Any other questions?
I have a question for Matty. If you could talk a bit about your work with your mum and jewellery.
Yeah. Well, I'm very lucky to work with my mum, who's here tonight. We've worked on the jewellery since my first season with Fashion East, so 5 seasons now, Mum. And I'm very lucky to have grown up with a very creative mum, who didn't work in the creative industries, but has come into it recently. Because when I was a kid, she was always making stuff and always, we always had fun, and that's how I picked it all up, really. And when we did the first earrings, we'd kind of done a few bits together, because Mum's always worn a big earring. Always. Always. So we were kind of trying to find a way of making them lightweight and easy to wear, and that's when we kind of started doing it. So it's really fun. I sometimes give you references, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I like to see what we kind of get out of it together. And I'm very lucky because I can be really honest with her. In a really nice, but I think it's always really fun. And you made so many this year. She made so many for this last season, and it's amazing. But yeah, it's great fun. I'm very, very lucky to be able to do that because, you know, not many people can get to say they work with their mum or dad so closely.
Actually, I did want to ask you, Stephen, about social media.
Oh yeah, it's sort of, in a way, how we communicate. And always, people from magazines, it was always so important what magazines had to say or what they selected. When I first started off, it was a real issue because I only had 2 stockists in the UK, so therefore Condé Nast magazines would not feature me.
Right.
They would not have anybody who didn't have more than that. So it was actually Mrs. Bernstein from Brown's who contacted various shops around the UK and said, if Tatler or Vogue were going to feature Stephen Jones' article, would they buy them as well as her? So that was the only way that I could get into the glossy magazines. And that's why magazines like ID and The Face never came around, because they didn't have that sort of arrangement. But that was then, but of course now you can do your own thing and share and connect directly with your audience.
Yeah. And do you sell from your Instagram?
A little bit, yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's not that we Instagram something and then we have 500 phone calls of people saying they want to have the same hat. But if somebody is thinking of getting a hat, you know, they will come to me, or, you know, I'd like to come and visit you. And if somebody's ordering an expensive hat or even buying a ready-to-wear hat, it's because they really believe in it, and it's not because it's a casual purchase.
Yeah. How about you, Matty? What's your relationship with social media?
I think it's interesting. I mean, when I was at St Martin's on the BA, it was kind of not really a thing. Like even then, on the MA, not even. It's quite a new thing, even, you know. But it's interesting. You get a lot more of a direct response from Instagram and stuff, and you hear from a lot more. I always hear from loads of kids who don't live in London who, you know, it's really interesting. It's nice. It's a very direct way.
Yeah.
It's definitely changing the way people react. I wonder how it will be archived, or how it will work, or whether what will come next. But it's great because it makes it very accessible, especially when you're not in London or when you're growing up. I would imagine that's how they all consume the fashion. They can become very knowledgeable from it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a strange knowledge.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting.
I mean, I think in the olden days we had ID that, you know, would go out to the provinces, and you'd that would be, you know, your one kind of way in.
Yeah.
But now,
Now you can get everything at once.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question for Matty. Like, what changes do you make to, like, those runway looks when they come into the market?
Selling.
Yeah.
So I have quite a limited amount of things that could go into production. Sometimes people want full looks, so it's kind of sometimes possible for very small orders. But already I'm quite strict on what I will sell and what I won't sell and how it works. And because a lot of it is certain textiles I can't get again and certain fabrics I can't get again. And if I lost that completely, it wouldn't really work for me. Someone else?
Last question. Who's in the middle there?
This is for both of you guys. Do you find that you work in a narrative setting with your work, or more of like visual references that you just put together that look interesting?
You want to go first?
Yeah. It's completely about the narrative, but it can be anything at all. I mean, really, one tries not to limit oneself. But funny enough, I work with one designer who doesn't want to see any images that I found on the internet. Will only have things from books, because then they will think that I've had to look through the book in order to find it. So therefore it will be more random.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a very specific thing.
Well, that's interesting, though.
And I feel for me at the start of a season, I'd like to have some narrative, but then, like, for instance, I'm starting researching next season. I will go in the library and pick kind of 10 books that I don't know, and then 5 books I do. You know, you have to be incredibly open, I think. And then I'll focus on everything that interests me, and then start to collate it for that season. And then, you know, half of it doesn't get used, it might come into next season. And then it starts changing, you know, you kind of keep going back or keep changing. It has to be exciting for the person making it.
St Martin's Library.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so important too, but I mean, I teach, you know, around the UK in various places, and a lot of the kids don't come with any book research, just Pinterest, which is even worse. It's even worse than Instagram. So no, I get it from everywhere, and I know everyone always says that, but I really do. It can come from anything, and a lot of it comes from certain colours even, certain textiles.
Every waking moment.
Yeah, you're always thinking, it's just, it may sound cliche, but it's true, you have to kind of be always open. And that's the fun bit.
Right. Okay, well,
I mean,
yeah.
you're always having ideas, and then sometimes it becomes hats and sometimes it becomes clothes. But the ideas process is continuous.
Exactly, never stops.
Yeah, well, we could carry on all evening, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Stephen Jones and Matty Bovan.